Our New Testament lesson this morning is from John chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 and 19 through 28. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I'm not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said." Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. They asked him, "Why then are you baptizing if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal." This took place in Bethany, across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. So ends our reading for this morning.
Probably like many of you who have Facebook friends, I have a Facebook friend / someone I used to know. that kind of a thing. In Facebook, they just call them friends, but it's really more of an acquaintance, somebody that I kind of grew up with and knew of and knew about. This is a person that, for whatever reason, however they do the Facebook thing, that they just keep popping up. And I read what's happening in their lives, and I often feel sorry for her. She's a person who has just had one seemingly bad thing happen after the other. You probably all have acquaintances and friends like that. Maybe you're the one on Facebook putting those kinds of things. It started a few years ago. It seemed like her life was doing pretty well. Had a great job and seemingly a beautiful house and all of those things, but all of a sudden, she started posting about some trouble that was happening at work and how one of her colleagues, somebody actually who worked beneath her, threw her under the bus so that she could take her job. That's the way she was expressing it on Facebook. I don't know, maybe there was other things involved, but you're just reading it as an acquaintance of someone whom you haven't really known for a while. So you feel for them. I'm sorry that happened, was my response to them. And then you start connecting other dots and you start seeing how more and more stuff starts going wrong for this person. She loses her home because she's out of work. She gets another home and she has other jobs, but then those jobs dry up in that particular region of the country and she's out of work again and she loses another house. All the while she decides that for the first time in her life she's going to get married. And she marries a man who'd been married before who had kind of older kids, and I think that marriage lasted about 3 months. You start getting a picture, right? Things just start going bad for her. She's a marvelous person from a marvelous family, and you really hope and pray for the best, but it got to the point where I just stopped saying anything because I didn't know what else to say. Prayers for you? That's about all we can say sometimes. But a couple of weeks ago, after she had been diagnosed with a couple of brain tumors, not one, but a couple, and other things like fibromyalgia and some other illnesses, some type of anemia, lots of bad stuff happening to this person, what do you say? Hang in there, kid. Remember that joy is deep within. It's not dependent on what's happening outside of us. It's about what's going on inside of us. No, I chose the better course and said nothing. Nothing. And Then she put a couple of weeks ago a post that said, I don't know if my voice matters, if anyone hears me, if my life matters. Now that's kind of almost a voice crying in the wilderness, help. But what do you do? What do you do in a situation like that? How do you help someone who seems in some ways so closed off to that voice in the wilderness? And it made me think of the Philosophy 101 question that you've asked yourselves, or at least have heard before, that maybe you were asked to write a 500 or 1,500 word essay on. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Now, where do you stand on that topic? Most of us, if we're freshmen in college, will write, well, of course a tree makes a sound. It doesn't matter whether I'm there or not. It makes a sound until you go deeper into the question and realize that's not what it's asking. What it's asking is, what is sound? What is sound? That's more of a physics question. Sound is simply vibrations. And what are vibrations dependent upon? A receiver. Something to interpret those vibrations. And in that particular question, there's no one present to receive the sound. Therefore, it doesn't make a sound. Or does it? Now, I was looking at that question because of thinking of this voice of John the Baptist, a voice crying in the wilderness. A tree falls in the forest. There's no one there to hear it. Doesn't make a sound. And if there wasn't anybody there to hear John's voice, would it have made a difference in the world? And I think of my friend, my acquaintance. Does her voice make a sound if there's no one there hearing it? No one there to care or respond to it? What is it that it's dependent upon? And then I realized in that question how human-centric that question is. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear, are we really talking about just people? If human beings aren't there present to hear that tree, then it doesn't make a sound? What about the ants and the termites and the birds and the squirrels and the other creepy crawly things and critters out there in the forest? Wouldn't they hear a tree fall? Wouldn't that make a difference? Or does it not make a sound because there's not a person there to hear it? That would be added to the 1,500 word version of that essay. John the Baptist, we're introduced to this voice of one crying in the wilderness. This is his first appearance in the Gospel of John, who begins his Gospel with, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word always was with God. A word, a voice, an eternal, cosmic voice crying in the wilderness of space, the wilderness of nothingness, of complete darkness and chaos. Yet the voice spoke. Did it make a difference? Was there anyone to hear it? You bet. You bet. Every voice makes a difference. Now, what do we know about John the Baptist before this particular introduction in this gospel? Nothing. John just says, there's the light, and this person's not the light. He's just making the way for the light. And then he introduces John the Baptist, who says himself, I'm not the light. I'm simply preparing you for the light. And then he quotes Isaiah, prepare ye the way for the Lord. There's a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, for the light, for the one who is coming. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, we learn a little more about the significance of this voice that's crying in the wilderness. And this isn't a voice of nothingness. This is a voice that comes from something. In the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, we're introduced to John the Baptist's father, Zechariah, who is not only a Levite and a priest, but one of the priests whose privilege it was to go into the Holy of Holies in the temple and to make sure that that eternal flame kept burning. Because that eternal flame represented the very presence of Yahweh, the very presence of the name that could not be said, no voice could speak it, nor could a hand write the entire name, so they left letters out of God's name, because it was too powerful to even speak it. That's where John's father was, taking care of the oil needed. And outside, which we don't hear in the gospel, but outside were all these people waiting for John the Baptist's father to come out after tending the flame to offer them a blessing, because that's what the priest would do. And this was a special blessing because this priest was just in the presence of the light of God. And that priest would then offer a blessing to all the people who had gathered and were waiting for this word. But not this day. John's father is tending to the flame, and he turns around and he notices an angel, Gabriel, is there. And Gabriel tells Zechariah that he and his wife Elizabeth, Mary's cousin, that Elizabeth, they're going to have a child. And his response is similar to the response of Abraham and Sarah. Ha! We're too old to have a child. You must be wrong. And Gabriel assures him, no, your child is going to be important. He's going to be a witness to the light of God. He's going to be important. He's going to prepare the way for God's Holy One. But because you doubted this, you will not be able to speak until your son is born. 9 months. 9 months without being able to speak, without being able to cry, without being able to make a sound. Now think of what it meant to those people outside who were waiting for their blessing. Zechariah comes out. Nothing. What do you think the people did? What's up with this guy? What? What do you say? How do you make those gestures? That sign language. All he could do was offer them some kind of hand blessing and gesture. And somehow they knew to go away. What a difference one voice makes. What a difference that Zechariah's, not just his voice, but his faith in that moment, or his momentary lapse of faith, has a ripple effect, not just on his life, but on the lives of the people that had gathered outside. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? It's like the pebble in a pond and the ripples that go out beyond. Each and every voice, each and every creature, each and every person is a ripple that adds to the next ripple and the next. No one is an island. We need each other. And this gospel lesson today assures us of this, because John is a voice crying in the wilderness, but guess what? There are people to hear it. It talks about the people who had gathered out in the wilderness. Now, I want you to put these important pieces together because this is necessary for us to understand the magnitude of this moment. John the Baptist is the son of a high priest, a priest who was well thought of, a priest who was given the incredible honor and gift of tending to the holy flame. Where would this first child, the only child of this family, live? At the temple. Where would he grow up? At the temple. What would he become? A priest, a Levite, just like his father. But John wasn't like all the other ones at the temple. John wasn't even like his father in some ways. Because somehow John was so in tune with God that he was able to hear voices that other people ignored or simply didn't hear. For them, the poor were like white noise. You know that white noise that you can just block out after a while. Some of you have machines that play white noise for you, or blue noise, whatever you want to call it, so you can sleep at night. For people that have difficulty falling asleep, my wife has to listen to white noise because the brain just won't shut up. So you have to have that white noise. Now, my brain's completely empty, so I have no problem falling asleep at night, and she hates me because of that. My head hits the pillow, she says, and it's out. So there's a benefit to nothingness. But the voice, and the voices of the poor, John saw, John heard. When they came to the temple, the poor came far exceeding the rich, because that's the way the world was. There's far more poor than there are rich, especially in that day. The poor and hungry. But they would make their journey to Jerusalem for their pilgrimage. They would come to the temple. They would exchange their hard-earned money, what little they had left that hadn't already been taken from them by the rich and the powerful, and they'd give it to the temple. And then the temple would go behind a door that they'd never see, make a sacrifice, and come back and let them know that they're now blessed and their sins are forgiven. And they could go home for another year and feel like they were okay with God, that maybe, just maybe, God might hear their cries. That somehow, just maybe, their lives might matter and make a difference. Wow. Now, why is it that John was the only one who could hear the voices of the poor? And what did those voices say? This is wrong. So he left the comfort and the privilege of the temple to go 20 to 30 miles outside into the wilderness, into the nothingness, so that he could be a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the light, prepare the way for God's Son. Because guess what? Every voice matters. There's no voice that you go, forget about them. They matter. Even those voices we sometimes can't relate to or somehow be indifferent to. Years ago, a young filmmaker from Flint, Michigan, Roger Moore, made his first feature film called Roger and Me. Some of you might have heard about it. Roger Moore grew up in Flint, Michigan, where his family and he himself were employed in the auto industry, just like people here in Lorain and Elyria. Some of you were employed in the auto industry. And he writes about what happened on that one day when Roger Smith, who was the CEO of General Motors at the time, decides that he's going to leave Flint, that the plants are going to leave and go to Mexico because it's cheaper. They can make things cheaper. Now, the thing about the movie is Roger Moore is trying to have a conversation with Roger Smith to find out how he feels about abandoning the people of Flint. So that's the comedy bit that's kind of involved with it. But he goes around and he's talking to the people who were in the industry, who were now out of work. He talked to people who were finding other work. And he does it from a very opinionated position, his opinion, and what it means to him and his perspective. So it's definitely a biased film. But one of the things he does is he goes to a golf course in Flint, the Flint Country Club. And there are some older ladies who are getting ready to tee off for their tee time. And he goes up to them and says, what do you think about what's happened here in Flint? And And the ladies kind of think about, well, I think that these people who are unemployed just need to get off their duffs and get out there and get a job. There's plenty of jobs out there. Now, you can say that he was cherry picking what scenes he was going to put in the movie. That's fine. But it does reveal a sentiment, probably one that we all have if we listen to some degree. What's wrong with the poor? Have you seen the ones locally who are by the freeway exits or at the Walmart Plaza in Lorraine, where they're standing there with signs, homeless, please help? One of them had a whole family with them, and they're standing there with a sign, please help. I'm sure they're receiving help. And then it's hard to not notice the sign up in Walmart, hiring. You know, it's hard to see that. It was hard for me when I lived in Berkeley, California, and there were literally homeless everywhere. And I don't want to be insensitive, but to say you had to step over them to get to your ATM is not inaccurate. They were right there. You literally had to step over or walk around to get to the ATM. And I remember one day going to this grocery store that was in Berkeley, and as I'm going there, a man runs up, panicked, saying, help me, I need money. My brother's just been shot, and they've life-flighted him to the hospital, but I don't have money for a BART ticket, Bay Area Rapid Transport System, BART. I don't have any money for it, and the station was just right there by the grocery store, so it's a likely thing. So I gave him the money for a ticket, and off he went. You know, and I go into the grocery store feeling like I just listened to the voice of the poor. You know, I had just done something good. And then the next day, I had to run back for another loaf of bread because it doesn't last long. That sourdough bread is really good. And I went back, and the same guy was there. He ran up to me, I recognized him, and he said the same thing. My brother's just been shot in life. I said, how many brothers do you have? And he laughed. Oh, you got me, man. And then I just said, why don't you just tell me what you need? And what do you need? I need some money for food, or whatever. You don't want to be an enabler. And that's the thing we tell ourselves, well, we're enabling them, probably just going to use it for drugs or alcohol or something like that. What's wrong with the poor is they just need to get off their bottoms and get a job. That's kind of the way we think of them even today, if we're being honest with ourselves. And that's what the people in Jerusalem thought. God just didn't bless them. It wasn't that they needed to get off their duffs. It was that, whatever happened, they weren't obedient to God or whatever, because God's the one who decides whether you're poor or wealthy, and obviously we're blessed, so God must like us more. It's an unfair system. Except John could no longer keep a deaf ear, and he heard them. He heard their cries, and he went to the wilderness to respond to them. And you know what he was doing? He was forgiving people for their sins without any money, exchanging hands. The poor were able to simply come to John the Baptist in the wilderness, get a nice bath in the Jordan River, and go home with their sins forgiven and have all that extra money in their pocket. Now, why do you think the Pharisees sent some people to John the Baptist in the wilderness? Because they were concerned about the voices that were crying? It's about the money, isn't it? The money that wasn't making its way to the temple. Who gave you the authority to do this? Do you hear it a little more clearly now? Now, I know that each one of us has been on some sort of a hike. We've walked the trails here in Amherst or the surrounding area. We have seen fallen trees. Did you hear them? No? But you see them. You step over them, you get out your chainsaw and cut them up sometimes. We see them. But that's not enough. What we're being asked to do here in the gospel today is to listen to the voice. Even after the tree has fallen, it still has a voice. It still has a cry. We have to listen, even in the silence of the forest. We have to listen to hear. It's not the tree that has to make the sound. It's us, the receiver, that has to hear it. You may know the phrase, "What would Jesus do?" It's a kind of a moral compass question. If you don't know what to do, what would Jesus do? That's not the question for us, not in the gospel today. The gospel today is asking us not what would Jesus do, but what will you do for Jesus? We all have a job. We all have a voice. We all have ears spiritually to be able to hear and know what's going on. John the Baptist knew his job. His job wasn't to be the light, but to prepare the way for the light. You and I each have a job, and our job is to repair the world, one piece at a time. You see, the Jewish community has a saying called Tikkun Olam, and what it means is to repair the world, one piece at a time. The world is broken, and each and every person has to do their part to listen, to learn, to grow, and to put the pieces together that we can put so that we can help to repair and heal the world. We all have our job. Our job isn't to be the light. Our job is to prepare the way for the light. Our job is to be the candle of joy that shows the world how to find joy.